Good evening and welcome to the Victoria and Albert Museum. My name is Jo Banham. I'm Head of Adult Learning here, and it's a very great pleasure to see so many of you here and to welcome you here again tonight. We're here for a very, very special evening. It's a huge honour and a great privilege to be welcoming a woman who is not only one of the greatest living writers of our time, but also a very talented sempstress and somebody who knows a great deal about fashion, who is Margaret Atwood. And Margaret is going to be in conversation with Rosie Goldsmith. Rosie, who's a broadcaster, BBC presenter and a journalist. And Rosie has conceived this series about fashion and fiction, and she's going to say a little bit more about that. So can we please welcome Rosie Goldsmith, first of all.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much to Jo Banham and the V&A, without whom, etc., this would not happen. Tonight, thanks to a very great woman and a very great museum, a dream for me comes true. Tonight, I'm bringing together several of my great passions under one glorious roof. Fashion and fiction, the Victoria and Albert Museum, and the novels and person of Margaret Atwood. Thank you to Margaret personally, with all my heart, for her enthusiasm and generosity in this project. I knew I had a fashion and fiction soulmate when a few years ago she started feeling the material of my dress at a literature festival. Just before we went on stage for a major interview celebrating 25 years of The Handmaid's Tale, within a few moments, minutes, not only had she accurately guessed the fabric and the origin of my vintage dress, which was 1950s American, but revealed a mutual love of dressmaking. And then, most fittingly, we went on stage to discuss The Handmaid's Tale, one of the most striking costume dramas ever written. And I will never forget a conversation about lingerie in the Canadian Embassy, consulate. More later. A brief fashion and fiction prologue before we begin tonight's show, if I may. This is a new series, as Jo said, of illustrated interviews with great writers from around the world who also believe in the creative crossover of fashion and fiction. Clothing and costume have been integral to plot and character across cultures and across the centuries. Just think of Anna Karenina, Madame Bovary, Thomas Cromwell. We can picture them all so well from the detailed descriptions of their appearance and understand the society they inhabit and the choices they made. In our day, Hilary Mantel, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, Linda Grant, Yung Chang, Joanna Trollope, Salman Rushdie, who we hope will all be guests in this series, have made the drama of costume central to their stories. So I'm delighted to launch this series with one of the greatest fiction and fashionistas in the world, Margaret Atwood. Margaret. And I wore red.
I noticed
yes.
that.
Highly significant, as you know, if you've read Margaret's books. Margaret, we have behind us, there will be a seamless flow of wonderful slides of Margaret's costume drama, your own costume drama. Just tell us a little bit about what we're going to be seeing, and then we can get on with the show, so to speak.
I think I arranged them more or less chronologically. So the short person that you've been seeing, that would have been me. And that would be in the 40s, the 1940s. I was born in 39, so it was the war. And not only that, we were up in the woods. So I didn't have a lot of clothes as a young person. And the clothes that I did have were not the kind of nice dress that you just described yourself as having had as a child, because you don't wear dresses.
Can you remember how many dresses or shoes you had, or trousers?
Yes, I didn't have dresses in the Canadian North because of the black flies and mosquitoes. And also it was the war, so I got my brother's hand-me-downs. So I think I started having dresses. I had some dresses in the winters because we were always in a city. But I think I started having dresses maybe when I was about 7. I had 2. And one, I would get to wear one while the other one was being washed. But once you went to school, you had to have dresses because as a little girl in those years, you couldn't wear trousers to school.
Did your mother have an influence on what you wore, apart from buying it for you, making it for you?
My mother was
Did she
not
like those?
interested in clothes at all. Famous for not being. Her sisters used to buy her clothes for her, and then she got married, and my father used to buy them because she herself was not interested in buying them. So I didn't have a mother who took me shopping for clothes. I think she took me shopping once for clothes. My first formal, I made all the rest. But the first one we actually went shopping for, and that was in the days when you went and got the brocade shoes, and you got them dyed to match. So we did that ritual.
So there was a special kind of dye, wasn't there, that you'd paint on your shoes to make them whichever colour you desired?
Or you could take them to a shoe person who did that for you. So either, depending on the color, I would think. Dark colors you were probably safe doing yourself, and light colors maybe not so much.
I painted my shoes gold recently.
Did you?
Yes, which was quite fun actually. But can you remember there being a moment when, did you like dresses when you first had your dress at age 7?
Like children who don't get to have things. For instance, we had a big conversation in our house about Barbie dolls when we had a little girl, and one person in the household felt that these were a bad influence, especially since they were so anatomically incorrect. But I felt, a real person shaped like that, they'd fall over.
Did you know at an early age that women weren't shaped like that?
Oh, yes. Everybody knows that. But I felt that if you deny a Barbie doll to a little girl, she's going to become very obsessed with them. So we did permit them, and I can tell you they make very good missiles. Because nicely balanced. So ours ended up being thrown a lot, and that's probably as it should have been. But I was very interested in clothing and knitting and all of those things because my mother wasn't. And it was therefore the other ladies on the street of fascinating appearance, and also paper doll books and people in magazines, not just the articles, but the ads. The ads were they were the idea of what people thought they ought to look like at that time.
So you grew up in the wartime,
yes,
as you said, and you grew up, you spent a lot of time in the wilds of northern Canada,
yes,
in the Quebec area, I think.
Quebec is quite large.
Well, so northern Quebec,
yes,
northern Quebec,
northwestern Quebec, yes.
And so you're wearing boys' clothes for a lot of the time for practical reasons.
Yes, we didn't even think of them as boys' clothes. No. They were just clothes.
And then you went into school uniform or school dresses?
Oh, no, public school, what we call a public school, meaning not a private school. What you call a public school means a private school.
You'd think the colonies would have learned something from us, but anyway.
Well, we did, but not that.
You didn't quite get that one
right.
No,
we didn't. I think we imitated your little, those little kilts they put on girls. Or in one of her earlier books, Hilary Mantel called them little chappies with breasts. That school outfit. But we didn't have those. We had ordinary 1940s war and post-war types of clothing, and with a snowsuit over top of it in the winter. And with the snowsuit, which consisted of the pants and the top and the boots and the scarf and the hat and the mittens, you took your plaid skirt and you stuffed it down the legs of the snowsuit.
There was a kind of bunched up area
very
here.
Bunchy,
yes.
Very bunchy, yes.
But was there for you, because this will, of course, we want to talk about the clothing in your books, but was there for you a moment when you realised the power of clothes? Did you fall in love?
Very early on.
You did?
Yes, I can go back to my early sketchbooks, Rosie.
Have you still got them?
Yes, I have some of them because my mother saved them. And they're full of just exactly what you would expect. Princesses, angels, people flying around with wings, their cats and dogs also equipped with wings to keep them company up in the air. So yes, I must have got that out of picture books.
And what about that moment when you started sewing? Because who gave you that sewing machine? I mean, there is one of the, I don't know whether we've had the image already of Margaret at her sewing machine, but...
Well, that was later. I started early with first knitting and crocheting, which I learned to do when I was 5 going on 6, and that's why I still have to put the wool around, because my stubby little fingers were too short to actually do that thing.
Yeah.
So I was interested in that. My mother was not. One of her friends taught me how to do that. But everybody in those days mended socks and mended rips and tears. So I learned to sew pretty early on with a needle, not with the sewing machine. So the sewing machine appeared, I think, when I was probably about 11.
And who gave you the sewing machine? Where did you get that from?
Well, it was I think it was just there. It was, I think my mom probably got it for me because I was so interested in making these sometimes rather unsuccessful garments.
What did you make?
The unsuccessful things?
Tell us the worst.
Okay, so...
Then I'll tell you my worst.
In those days, girls were taught something called home economics. And in home economics, before you were even in what we call high school, which you would call, secondary school or something like that. So therefore, around the age of 11 or 12, you learnt to make just what your mother needed another one of, an apron. Oh, this is so wonderful.
Thank you, darling.
Oh, thank you. Yes. First you made the tea towel. That was pretty easy. You hemmed it, right? And then you made the apron. And then you went on to high school, and because I was in the class that got the extra class, we had a choice. We could take home economics or art or secretarial sciences. I ought to have taken secretarial sciences. Then I would know how to type.
You still can't type?
No. I have to look.
Right, okay.
Yes, I have to look.
How do you write your books?
Well, I can type, but I have to look. Whereas if you had taken secretarial sciences, you would be able to do it without looking. Would you not? Yes, you would.
Yeah.
But the people who took that, usually, in fact, they all smoked in the washroom. They were all about 3 years older than I was. And they had very thin eyebrows, and they wore their boyfriends' athletic letters. They were very scary people. So I took the home economics, and therefore I can sew really quite well, but I can't type.
And you can make a Victoria sponge, I should think, as well, too.
I can do those kinds of things, but I'm now at the age where I don't eat much of that, so it's no use. Nor do I sew much, so that's not any use either. But
no, it's a pity because, I mean, we all grew up, I should imagine, you know, of a certain age, myself included, we grew up learning how to mend and to make skirts. And, I mean, everybody could make skirts.
I made lots of skirts. I also made a beautiful
smocked.
I had a younger sister, and I made a beautiful smocked dress for her, and she was then in our fashion show that we put on. The whole class put it on. So all of those things, yes, I can do all of those things, but as I say, it avails me not.
Yes.
I mean,
no, and there's a pile of mending in our house still too. I don't do that anymore, which is unfortunate because I love doing it, and I just it's one of those things you just say you don't have the time anymore to do it, and we have so much choice in clothing now when you can go out and buy
that's the problem.
Whatever you want.
There you are. Yes.
Yes, buy as many skirts as you want. Now, what time, though, you started writing at a very young age.
Yes.
As well. You started drawing at a very young age.
Drawing, too, as well, yes.
So were you always drawing clothes and thinking about clothes and writing from an early age?
Not in that order, no. I think I went through a period when I thought that I was not, in fact, writing, and I thought that I was going to, my first idea was that I would be an artist. And then I realized that that was probably not very practical. And then I was going to be a fashion designer. So I drew a lot at that time. And since that time, I've confined those interests pretty much to, for a while I had a poster business. in college. I made silkscreen posters on the ping pong table, and that's what I did instead of working in a shop. It was my other income. So I had to think about those kinds of clothes because I did posters for plays. Yeah, so all of those things.
So did you ever have any of your fashion designs made up? I mean, was that a serious pursuit to become a fashion designer?
Well, as serious as you can be at the age of 13.
Pretty serious,
But
I
I
think.
used to go
More
through-
serious than any
yes.
other age.
You used to be able to, in fact, you still can. There are a lot of pattern books. So I used to go through the pattern books and figure out whether I could actually make this thing, how hard it would be. And sometimes I took on things that were maybe a little too ambitious. The yellow shorty coat was not a success. No, but you do learn the importance of all those things, such as pressing, for instance, such
The
as making
seams and the darts.
making basting first, trying it on, pressing everything, et cetera, et cetera.
I think we probably by now, I think there are a few giggles occasionally, and I think it's because you're seeing some quite wonderful images. I know what you're looking at. I just wanted to, before we by the way, I did need to ask you about this one before. This is, what are you wearing?
What indeed? What am I wearing?
Why are you wearing a boiler suit with medals on to see the Queen?
I don't think it was a boiler suit, it was a suit.
It was a suit.
Yeah, so I'm wearing a suit, which I hardly ever wear a suit because I was told to wear a suit. So
when you meet
get
the
a suit
Queen,
to
you wear a suit.
Apparently so.
And this is your most recent incarnation.
That's my most recent thing. That is, in fact, in Norwich, where they have a place where you can try on men's 18th century wigs. That's not my hair.
Maybe we should just look at a few of the images because I know that some of them may need a little bit of explanation. This is obviously your research for Oryx and Craigie.
Not quite.
Flood.
You just saw the graves of the early members of the Franklin expedition that were buried on Devon Island. So it's up in the Arctic. This is over in Greenland.
Oh, gosh.
And the hat in the Greenland picture is a typical Inuit double-knitted hat.
It's very beautiful.
That's my mom and her tomboy. She's over over there with her bush clothes on. That's me with no shoes. The reason we have no shoes is not that our parents were cruel, but if you went up in April and then your feet grew, by September you didn't have any shoes.
And that's a very fetching bonnet.
Yes, I know, don't you think? It's probably the only feminine thing that I had. That's my dad.
And this is this your scrapbook?
That's my scrapbook. You can see the kinds of things that interested me.
And this is your Sherlock Holmes deerstalker hat?
No, that's an ad for baby powder.
Incredible.
Yeah.
And this, and there are so many covers of your books, which we'll talk about later.
That's from a real book. It was a book called The Art of Cooking and Serving by a woman called Sarah Field Splint. And the picture is of the two kinds of maids' outfits that you should have for your maids, of which, of course, you would have copious numbers up in the woods. So I was very interested I was very interested in those maids because they were so foreign to anything I knew about. So one of the outfits is the daytime outfit, and one of the outfits is the evening outfit. And the reason we had the Crisco cookbook was Crisco doesn't go bad.
Crisco is the...
It's a vegetable shortening into which they put, we do not know. But for that reason, it didn't go bad, and therefore we had a huge vat of it, a great big vat of Crisco. And all the recipes would be made of Crisco, partly because it was the war, you couldn't get butter, but partly because it didn't go bad.
Well, you've done well from that. And this is you making your first public speech, is that right?
I'm making my first public speech in one of my dresses.
And this is one of the two dresses. And this is...
Okay, now I'm into making the clothes. So that would be a 1950s circle skirt, quite easy to make. You usually made them in panels. And they had a waistband, and then you wore a rather wide belt with that.
They're very beautiful. They're quite easy to make.
Very easy to make. Those and dirndls were very easy. So that's up in the woods again with all my cousins and my brother.
So you had a sister and a brother?
I had a much younger sister and a brother who was older by 3 years and not in any way interested in clothing.
What about your sister? Was she interested?
Very. She was very interested in clothing, but she was 11 years younger.
Did you dress her up in pretty little
I
pink
dressed her up
dresses?
in pretty little pink dress, just as she wished to be dressed. And I also dressed up her Barbie dolls in beautiful ball gowns and Alexander McQueen type weird things that I just saw the show.
If you go and see that, you'll know what
Yes,
we're talking
I
about.
made some very wonderful, you could go to the remnant counter and get some small pieces of very beautiful fabric and make them into ball gowns for dolls. So I did that quite a bit.
Now, I must ask you about
That's
this.
the one that my mother took me shopping for.
This is quite extraordinary. This is what I dreamed of when I was younger.
Did
was to have
you?
big dresses, lots
Big
of petticoats.
dresses. When were you born?
A long time ago.
Yes. So was I, but I mean, for characters, I always want to know when they're born because it shows what clothes they would have been interested in what year.
I was born in the wrong era.
The wrong era,
Yes,
so you couldn't do
always,
that.
So I couldn't do.
You had no crinolines.
But I'm making up for it. Let's
Oh,
put it that
all
way.
right.
But this love of the
made
big
that
puffy.
one.
You made that.
Yes. I made that. That's pretty good, isn't it?
It looks as though it's got some interesting detail.
Well, it has a big collar.
It's got a big collar. I would say it's a rather Tomorrow Belongs to Me kind of look.
Yes, that's exactly what it was. That's I didn't make that. It's a red mini dress of those 60s with the fishnet stockings.
Probably made of corduroy.
No, it was cotton.
No? Very nice.
Because it was a summer mini dress.
You've actually done some real photo shoots
This would be the
too, haven't you?
long coat of about 1970. Remember them?
I do.
You wore them with the mini skirt underneath the tall boots. No?
You did. I'm sure somebody does. You did some real fashion shoots, didn't you? I mean, you were photographed by Vogue and
Yes.
and the Canadian magazine. I can't remember.
Oh, lots of them.
Mrs. Canada or which
One of them. I
one
don't
of
think
them.
there's anything called Mrs. Canada, but maybe
Something like that.
There will be soon.
and also
Jolly old Mrs. Canada coming down the chimney very soon. That's from the Salvation Army, $25.
Fantastic, wonderful.
But very warm in winter.
What was it like for you as a writer having a proper fashion shoot? Did you enjoy it? The transformation
Well, I
of the
don't think
makeup
they
and
were
the hair.
fashion shoots. They were they were back of the book formal photographs.
But very glamorous.
There is one. That's one of my cats, the stupid one.
That's not. That's not to do with cats, are it?
No. That's just an improvised flapper costume on a boat. These things take place on boats because you can't actually go and get the real thing, whatever it is.
And there is one Vogue shoot, I think, with you looking.
With the 1920s beaded dress.
There's that one, yes.
That was from a book called Women of Canada, in which they did
That's the one, Women of
the
Canada.
before and the after pictures. So they took a picture of you looking the way you really look, and then they did a 1940s makeup job on you with the orange lipstick, and just how they used to photograph film stars in the 40s, black and white. And they did this with a number of women, and I liked it very well because it wasn't just the young and the pretty. They did a big range of people showing what you can do with lights and mirrors. And they all came out looking very glamorous, no matter what their age. I think my favorite is quite a dumpy-looking woman that they swathed in white fox. And she looks exactly like Marlene Dietrich by the time they get done with her, which makes you wonder what Marlene Dietrich really looked like. So it was a fun exercise to do, and that's where that one is from. And the one that looks like Madonna that was photoshopped from it came about because I met some people making an Iranian vampire Western film called A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night. And it turns out that the girl who is walking home alone at night and therefore getting aggressed by men is a vampire Muslim girl who bites them all and serves them right. So they were doing a crowdsourcing campaign, and they asked if they could use a photograph of me made to look like Madonna as one of the perks. So people give you money to finish your movie, and you give them a...
Oh, there we are.
That one,
yes.
yes. So
I did have to look a few times at that one to say...
Yeah, it's the same picture as the other one, only with different hair. They Madonna'd it. This was a birthday party we were throwing. I'm in my queen outfit, and Graham is in his bathrobe being the king. A child's birthday party, I hasten to add. That's for another event. It was a literary festival, actually. They always had a theme, and the theme of that one was weather. So I'm being a cold front, and Graham is being a massive depression.
And this one...
I'm invoking the great pumpkin, as I do every Halloween.
I'm glad you explained that one, because it's rather a strange image, that one. Now, you do have, obviously, a great love of vampire teeth and blood.
Me, yes. Well, no, I don't have a great... They're just around, Rosie.
But there are lots of photographs of you
life.
in horror costumes, or with
you may
people
think
in
that's
horror.
a horror costume, but actually it's a raincoat.
Wrong image at the wrong time.
That's William Wallace. That's Sir William Wallace.
Of course that's
yes,
William Wallace,
of course.
yes.
And he explained the entire Battle of Stirling Bridge to me in that outfit. And this is from the production that we put on of Year of the Flood. And this is them in full spate. They're doing the whole, those are the 3 actors doing it. So we did this in about 25 different cities, including 8 of them in England. This one is in Canada. And they made all of their, that's a hat made of twisted newspaper and duct tape, I think. So they made everything themselves for that production.
See, that's the one I mean. That's
Yes,
the one.
well, yes, that's has been, people have tried using that for blackmail, but it doesn't work on me.
Well, we know about the
Yes.
Canadian Health Service.
Yes, I think I'm actually supposed to be not exactly a vampire, but something else.
But do you enjoy all these? I mean, you go to a lot of conventions. I mean, is there a Margaret Atwood costume convention? Is there something?
Not yet.
Not yet.
No.
We hope after this series that there will be.
At Comic-Con in San Diego, and people put the most amazing care into the costume. They make all their costumes. They do it by hand. They're very proud of them, and they love having their pictures taken in them. I don't know who these people are supposed to be.
And then they're not characters from your novels.
Not yet.
Not yet.
No. What I am wearing is a dragon hat, the green thing.
You do get asked to do the oddest things, don't you? I mean,
well, I could always
what
say...
made you do that?
I could always say no.
But you didn't.
No,
didn't say
I was
no.
there for a reason. We were launching an anthology dedicated to Ray Bradbury, who had just died. So I had a reason to be at Comic-Con. It is true I didn't have to go around meeting all those people, but on the other hand, it wouldn't have been any fun if I hadn't.
Absolutely.
Right? These are the steampunkers. Aren't they great?
The League of Steam Doctors.
Yes, every single one of them has done their own, and these are the Klingons from Star Trek. You can see how effective they are.
If we
this is the vampire movie.
That's the one.
These are the Iranian vampires.
I'm not going to ask you too much about Iranian vampires, because I think we might go off on a tangent.
Apparently this film has done quite well.
Has it?
Yeah. A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night. It's won some awards.
Now, I'm going to try and ignore that one.
Why? That's Las Vegas.
Of course.
Everybody in Las Vegas looks like that. And this is a friend of mine who thought that this was the inner us because we were both born in November.
Well, so was I. So there we are.
Well, where's your hat?
So only a few days apart.
Yes.
Now,
that's a Scottish theme.
That's Scottish.
It was on
I
a
wonder
boat.
how we can tell.
The plaid.
The plaid. As far as with costume in your novels, I mean,
that's how I travel.
That's what you take with you.
Made very small, and then I put my...
This is obviously... They put you in a little bag, and Graham carries you in a little hold-all.
No, I just ship myself by mail. So this is me
You
doing
can
my...
type. You can type.
Yes. Well, I can keyboard.
You can keyboard.
This is
yeah.
on the Queen Mary. That was just... And these are the Greek academic costumes of the University of Athens. Aren't they beautiful?
They're really wonderful.
Look at them.
No, they look like some
crowns
Freemasons
and-
group. I
yes,
mean,
exactly.
just incredible. And just
Don't
why?
you think there's a family resemblance?
You and the Queen, definitely. She's. Why is she frowning though?
We're not frowning, we're conversing.
You're conversing.
Well, what she was actually saying was this, because it was an event at which people from the past 50 years of her reign, so one person was picked from each year. She had somebody going around whispering to her who this person was. So the person went whisper, whisper. And then she looked at me and she said, "Oh, you're a writer. People seem to think quite a lot of those over here." meaning,
Was that here?
No, it was Canada.
Oh, there.
There, yes.
Also one of ours.
And I said,
yes.
"Because we don't have any Hollywood." And she said, "Oh, ha-ha."
And then moved on.
Yes.
And moved on. I think everyone's allocated a minute
Yes,
or a minute and a half in her presence.
Well, there was a jockey there and somebody who'd been on a rocket, and I think she liked them much better.
They were probably glitzy. I would like to spend some time talking about costume in your novels.
Yes, let's do that
Let's do
I
that.
think we've done those pictures.
Because there are quite a few of them, quite a few of your novels. You did use clothing. You did put clothing into your very first novel, into The Edible Woman, which was the first I read. And I have my very own copy, my very early copy there as well, which I'm very proud of. These are actually my books, which I've collected over many years. I have more at home if you really want to see my collection. But I do want to know how you why it became such a prominent role from the beginning. It wasn't just because you enjoyed dressmaking.
Well, I think that if you read a lot of books, as I do, and you start filtering for certain things, some authors feed their characters quite a lot, and in detail. We find out what the people are eating. Others don't. For instance, Dashiell Hammett, nobody eats. They drink quite a bit, and they smoke a lot, but they never eat anything. He didn't eat much himself, so I don't think he was very interested in it. But somebody like Robertson Davies, you will have not only characters eating, but everything they eat, described in quite a lot of detail. And I think clothes are the same. So authors are either interested in showing a character's personality through the clothing, or they're not. Or they may be interested in showing what that person thinks of him or herself, and then what other people think of him or her, their secret thoughts about what that person is wearing. And you can pretty much divide people as to whether they're interested in that or not. Some people are very interested in furniture. So they will, you don't just walk into a room, you walk into a room of a certain kind. So Dickens is very interested in furniture. He's somewhat more interested in furniture than he is in clothing, unless the clothing belongs to an eccentric or old or poor person, or has a symbolic value. So Christmas Carol, we hear quite a lot about what Bob Cratchit is wearing, because it isn't enough. And we hear about Scrooge's miserly behavior through the kinds of clothes that he's wearing. So he's very good on that, I think.
But you, looking at your novels from this perspective, from the perspective of clothing and what clothes say about us and how they define us, men and women in your novels, it's a very central part. I mean, obviously, I was looking for those images, looking for those passages where you went into great detail about how they stereotype people.
Well, not just it needn't be a stereotype. It's part of a person's self-presentation, or part of how a person is presented by other people if you don't have control over what you're wearing, such as prison clothing or uniforms. So all of those things say something about society, and this is by no means just a modern thing. In fact, if anything, it's less true now than it was for about 4,000 years before our age. For instance, one of the first legal code we know anything about, which is the Code of Hammurabi, made it a matter of the death penalty if you were a female person who wore a veil and you were in fact a slave or a lower class person. The veils were supposed to be for upper class people. So there were social divisions mandated pretty early on, and the sumptuary laws run all the way through medieval times and the Renaissance. You know, who was allowed to wear what, depending on their social class. One of the only times that women demonstrated against the powers that be in ancient Rome was the demonstration against the Opian Laws. And the Opian Laws had been put in when Rome was fighting a war, and they wanted some more money, so they got gold and sumptuous articles from rich people who lived in Rome. Then the war was over, and the men were allowed to have their gold and sumptuous articles back, but the women were not. And they actually had a riot in the Forum over that, over the right to have them back. And the senators caved.
Amazing. I didn't know. So that hence,
Yeah,
hence sumptuary laws.
Sumptuary laws, who could wear what, who was permitted to wear what you then thought of yourself according to what you're wearing. And if you go to the National Portrait Gallery, you can see this in action. Because to get a portrait taken, it wasn't just a photograph, you had to sit for it. So you were presenting yourself the way you wished to be seen in your most ideal moment.
So the kind of research that you've done for several, I mean, some of the novels are set, The Edible Woman was set in its day, in the
Yes.
60s, 60s. And then a quick jump to Handmaid's Tale, which is the future. But that has so many historical references in it as well.
All of the references are historical.
How did you come up with, I mean, The Handmaid's Tale is probably the most costume-infused, with Alias Grace maybe as well.
Yeah, all you have to do with The Handmaid's Tale is go back 100 years or so. So which parts of the body you could expose, if you're a woman, what was considered modest. Middle of the 19th century, you were supposed to wear a big bonnet, and if possible, a veil, so that leering, rude men could not peek in at your face.
So the white wings that you
those
designed?
They're like nuns. They're also like the old Dutch cleanser packet of about 1945, which had a Dutch woman with a great big white hat on. You couldn't see her face. And a blue dress and a stick. So she was supposed to be chasing the dirt.
So what about, I mean, I know that red is basically bad.
No, red is passionate.
Red is passionate.
Yes.
Well, red is passionate, but
red
it also
is Mary
does
Magdalene, blue is Virgin Mary. That's in all the Christian iconography for hundreds of years.
You became, obviously, with The Handmaid's Tale, there's a lot of color coding.
Absolutely.
All the way through the book. Class, gender, there are the uniforms, the military uniforms for
We've
men.
always done it.
We've always done it.
We've always done it. We continue to do it to this very day.
Do you think that in Alias Grace, so there's a different approach to clothing?
Alias Grace, I had to go back and look at the real clothes. And it's a little bit hard in the 19th century because you can get the external appearances of the clothes. You already have pattern books by that time. You already have fashion books with young ladies in fashion plates showing.
Did you have fashion magazines already? Sort of mid-19th century?
Oh yes, yeah, definitely showing the fashions of the season and what was going to be fashionable. Edith Wharton describes women from New York going over to Paris, buying the latest fashions, taking them back to New York and storing them for a year because it was not quite respectable to be too fashionable too soon. You had to wait until it had become more normal. And that's what they did. But they also looked at magazines a lot, and that was not necessarily so you could go into a shop and buy those, because you couldn't, but you could get your dressmaker to make that for you. So they were looking at those pretty early. You can research those, you can look at paintings, but where you will have trouble is with the undergarments and the boots and shoes, because they don't show. So I had the most trouble with the undergarments, especially for winter. When did pantaloons come in with hoop skirts over here? Because the wind was blowing them up, and that's when those long pantaloons came in. But what was happening on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean when it was 40 below? And what part did red flannel petticoats play, etc.? And what about the boots? And the other thing that was hard to find out was what were women wearing in the penitentiary. I did eventually find it out through an archivist at the penitentiary, but he really had to look because there weren't any pictures.
This is the story of Grace Marks, who also is, I think, is she your only dressmaker as a main character in all your novels?
I believe she is the only dressmaker, but you had to do that in the penitentiary. In fact, the first uniforms for what was to become the Royal Canadian Mounted Police were sewn by those women in that penitentiary. And the other thing that they also sewed were the mail bags for the first mail deliveries, the bags that they put the mail in. So they were kept quite busy doing sewing.
With if we just look briefly at some of the other novels, I mean, with The Year of the Flood, where you've got, I suppose, you've got futuristic fashion again.
Not so much, because there would have, at that, just after a pandemic, there's a lot of extra clothes lying around. So you wouldn't have had to make any for quite some time, but you would have wanted to select things that were going to be comfortable in view of the fact that you no longer had any air conditioning.
Did you, I mean, do you still sketch out your clothes? I mean, when you're writing a book, is it better for you to have an image?
I sketch.
You sketch.
It's true.
You do. So
How did you know?
Had an idea, but I haven't asked you that before. So I am interested. I mean, do you have a sketchbook for each of your novels?
No, it tends to happen in the margins while I'm writing the scene.
So that actually would be my idea of a future book, would be to have a book that you could actually design or draw the clothes into the book at the same time. If you wouldn't mind inventing that.
Well, it's been invented already.
Good.
Well, no, not really, because people who read books in any sort of regular and serious way and like reading novels, one of the things they like is the fact that they themselves are the set designer, the sound engineer, yes. They have an idea of how these things look, and everyone has their own Mr. Darcy. Their own Mr. Darcy may have been influenced now by the fact that that man came out of a lake wearing a shirt, which doesn't happen in the book. But usually people have their own idea of how these characters look, and they find it an interruption to have something popping in. And I do, but you can get these pop-up e-books.
But there are such detailed descriptions in your novels of what people are wearing and how clothes define them.
Yeah, from time to time, often how they feel in those clothes, whether the clothes are comfortable or not, because some clothes are notoriously not very comfortable. I think they've become more comfortable, but what you used to have to wear under them was really quite uncomfortable.
And are you quite knowledgeable about fabrics as well, and about the technology of fabric and clothing?
Probably I'm not up to date.
There was...
I would have to do a little crash course on what they're now making.
if you had to.
But the 50s were the age of the miracle fabrics that came in great abundance and then disappeared in the 60s because they were actually kind of unpleasant. But nylon, for instance, came in. They now have blends, which are much more comfortable, but in the 50s, they were the pure thing. So you'd get nylon, Dacron, Orlon. They all pilled like mad, as it turns out. And the white nylon blouse that looked so nice the first time you put it on, by about the third time was an unfortunate shade of yellowy gray.
Quite noisy as well.
It was quite noisy, yes.
I hear you've got quite a few books about military, about the military and costume as well.
Well, they've accumulated over time, partly because my dad was very interested in it, partly because Graham's father was in the Canadian Army, and partly because I'm just interested in reading about it. And it is true that a number of military operations have fallen on sad times because people did not put enough thought into fabrics and clothing.
Do you mean major military campaigns?
Well, for instance, Mussolini didn't give his troops proper boots. Can you imagine? In the Korean War, the American side, who thought they were being very modern, gave their troops nylon sleeping bags with zippers and also nylon pants that went wispy, 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 wispy as you walked through the night, making you a primary target. The zipper killed a lot of men in World War II. Why was that? Because you scratched your match to light your cigarette and it made you very visible.
And also zippers don't always zip up and down
I don't think that was the problem. Was the matches.
It was the matches.
Yeah.
Now, we've got a little bit of time
But
left.
the zippers on the sleeping bags, that was a disaster because if you were zipped into your sleeping bag and somebody tiptoed through the lines as they did, cutting every second throat, you could not get out of your nice zippered sleeping bag.
And that's the kind of detail which you need if you're writing novels about armies and wars.
If you are, but I think that I think they're a lot more alert to this kind of thing now, don't you think?
What do you think?
I mean, what about puttees? Remember puttees?
Puttees?
Don't you think they were quite mad? They were. You all know what they are, don't you? There's these long strips that you had.
Oh yes, okay, yes.
Yeah.
Quite mad. Yeah.
Somebody in this room probably knows what their rationale was. But I would think that if one of them started coming undone as you were running across a field, you'd probably be in quite a lot of trouble.
I think they're called gladiator boots now or something too, because they have a similar kind of structure, I think. And there are lots of people who know a lot about costume history here at the V&A, so we'll definitely pursue that one. What do you think is the underlying idea of this combination of fashion and fiction? I mean, just to sort of round it up.
Well,
now, why do you think it's so effective?
Let's pretend you're meeting a person for the first time, as you do when you meet a character in a book. What do I see? I see your face, of course. I focus on that. I see your earrings. I see your necklace. And those are all part of you. They're all part of the total image of who I've just met. And when we meet a character in a book, we like to know something about them. And we might zero in on their voice. We might zero in on their posture. We might be told, if it's Henry James, we are going to be told what they're wearing. We will be. And that is part of the personage that we have just met. I'll never forget that charming pastel umbrella in The Ambassadors.
Absolutely.
Like
I mean,
that.
I'm sure we all have...
They're details that register. So clothing is just one of those details. It's not the only one. What we remember about Madame Bovary when Charles Bovary first sees her, we remember that she's been doing the laundry and she just has a little slight line of sweat on her upper lip. He finds that very attractive.
Strange that, but,
yes.
but true. Now, we can either, depending on how Margaret would like to proceed with the last few minutes, have a short reading from one of the novels. I think we've got so many, but maybe you'd like to choose something. Margaret's also agreed, as you know, to sign books afterwards, but which would you prefer, to have a few questions or do a short reading, or
let's have some questions, and you can tell me about the puttees.
Yes.
What they were for.
Would you find that the clothing in A Handmaid's Tale is more about being seen or more about blending in? Is it more surveillance or?
Okay, I think the clothing in The Handmaid's Tale is about control. So just about everything in The Handmaid's Tale is about control. But it's read partly for symbolic reasons and partly for the same reason that they gave German prisoners of war in Canada red clothing. Because if you're running away across the snow and you're wearing red, you're very, very visible. So it makes them very visible, and they're both seen and untouchable and controlled by that clothing.
My grandmother was a proud textile scientist for the Eaton's Corporation in Winnipeg, and she was deeply into her textiles and touching people's fabrics and understanding what clothes they were wearing, and that appears to be a bit of a lost art. Do you think that people are quite disconnected from their clothing now that it's not produced quite so locally, or they're not involved at all in the production of their clothing?
I think they always read the label the first time that they have to clean it. Or let us say, if they do not read the label the first time that they have to clean it, they may have a sad experience, because it will either say that you can wash it and at what temperature, and you can or cannot iron it, or that you cannot wash it and that you should not iron it. So those labels, I think that's what they zero in on mostly. I have a very fascinating book. It was a home economics book from about 1911, and it has a whole chapter on how to tell if a fabric has been sized, by which I mean that they soaked inferior, cheaper fabrics in solution that usually contain some form of metal or starch to make them appear to be more expensive, crisper, and more substantial fabrics. And they were teaching these girls basically chemistry, how to take a sample of that fabric and figure out what it really was. So you wouldn't be sold something under one name and it would turn out to be something else. I don't know. I think because of truth in labeling, you now have to say what's in it. But once upon a time you didn't, and people were putting all kinds of additives into it as they were into food at that time.
Have we got lots of Canadians in the audience, by the way? How many? Oh,
a whole
fantastic.
Sea of them. A sea of them.
That's really wonderful. Are you the only one from Winnipeg? You're from Vancouver?
Yes.
Wonderful. We love
but
Vancouver.
The parents were from Winnipeg. A lot of people whose parents were from Winnipeg moved to Vancouver. Isn't that so? Vancouver can be very, very windy.
Yes.
Yes.
We have, our family was in Winnipeg and Vancouver as well. Right.
The future that you created in the trilogy, the kind of climate change future, it was really recognizable to me, the outfits that you got the God's gardeners wearing. But I was just wondering, the new race, or the new species, the new human species that was created, I wondered if you saw is that the end of fashion for us? Or are we going to get to a place where we are wearing new skins that do it all for us? I was wondering where the inspiration for this new species came from.
Well, the new species is reverse engineered, by which I mean that the creator of the new species looked at all the kinds of things about us that get us into trouble and tried to do away with them. And one of the things that has always got us into trouble was the need for more territory, which has made us quite aggressive. And why did we need the territory? We needed it to grow food, and we needed it to grow things like cotton and sheep. So these people don't need clothing, and therefore they don't need territory in the same way. And for the same reason, they can eat leaves and grass just like rabbits, with some side effects. but they don't need to have agriculture. So they don't need slaves, they don't need machines, they don't need territory, they don't need to have wars. That was his thinking. Too bad for the fashion industry, but
Absolutely. that has put it...
But they don't need industry, so...
Yes, I was interested in Cat's Eye and in the character of Elaine, the artist, and her sort of anxiety about finding the outfit that will be right for her representing the role of artist. And then
Yeah,
you've got
she
that
fails
scene-
dismally at that.
Yes, and then when she's actually trying on clothes in the changing room, and there's that moment of the hand coming out to steal her purse.
Yes.
And could you talk a bit more about sort of
Well,
the anxiety?
that's a detail drawn from real life.
Hi, we saw you meet the Queen in one of those pictures, and just thinking about what you said, how you were talking about the way in which our clothes define us, I wondered what you make of the way the Duchess of Cambridge, Kate Middleton, what she wears.
What do you make of the clothes worn by the Duchess of Cambridge, Kate Middleton?
What do I make of them?
You met the Queen, yes. What do you make of how she dresses?
I think she dresses quite uneventfully. I think she's watching her back. I think she probably has people who pretty much tell her what it is appropriate for her to wear. I don't think she's become the fashion plate that Diana was, and I think she's probably doing that advisedly, wouldn't you say?
No comment.
Yeah, well, what do you think? I mean, I haven't actually paid, to be honest with you, I haven't paid that much attention. But why would I, really? I don't know. I'm too old.
You got rid of the royal family.
No, not a... No, we didn't. We're Canadian.
You're Canadian. You still
We're
love
Canadian, yes.
us.
It's on the money.
A brave man.
Hi.
Wonderful.
There's a scene in The Handmaid's Tale where Offred goes to Jezebel's, which is taken to Jezebel's.
Yes.
Which is kind of a state-sanctioned...
Upmarket whorehouse.
Yeah. And I was really interested in... so there's a bunny costume. Yeah, the women are sort of... have a stock of costumes.
Yes, well, what they're doing is wearing the outfits that are now forbidden in that world, and they're wearing the outfits that were not forbidden in the period before that time. So, cheerleaders' outfits, things like that.
I was just wondering, I was interested to know, I guess your thought process, like how you chose.
Could you speak up a tiny little bit?
Yeah, sure. I guess I was thinking about how clothes, thinking about clothing and performance. I was wondering if that was part of what you're thinking, if the women were sort of fitting into an illusion or into a fantasy by wearing like a bunny costume, and why that costume particularly was interesting.
Fantasy figures, is that it? I think people are making other people into fantasy figures all the time, and they're also making themselves into fantasy figures, which is partly what you saw at Comic-Con. But it is that old Mardi Gras thing where you have your ordinary life, and then you have your holiday from your ordinary life, in which you get to dress up as somebody you're not, except that maybe that's the inner you. And when you're doing that for a party or at Comic-Con, that is a choice you're making. If, however, it's coercive and somebody else is forcing you into some kind of an outfit, that's an entirely different use of it.
There's also the red dress in The Edible Woman, Marion's red dress as well.
Yes, that's a person that she feels is not her. So when people are channeling their inner vampire and things,
Must be me.
that is something they're doing voluntarily and as a form of self-expression and as a holiday from their ordinary life. Something that's interested me quite a lot in recent years is why people have been electing to dress up as zombies. Because vampires, you can see, they're quite classy, they have nice outfits, they're rich, they're sexy, and they're very narrative, they talk a lot.
What's your conclusion about zombies, then?
Well, it's quite a long conclusion, so I won't bore you with it right now, but it's an interesting social phenomenon because all of the others, the werewolves and even the Frankenstein monsters, book version, not film version, have got something to recommend them. But zombies not. You know, they don't have a brain. They don't have a sex life. They don't have nice outfits. They don't have any money. The bits are falling off them. They smell bad. So what is the appeal? What is actually the appeal of being one? Recognition. You mean that's the inner you? Well, you don't have to have a...
Thank you, Graham, for that.
You don't have to have a job. In fact, you wouldn't be able to have a job. So if you don't have a job anyway, I suppose you might think, I might as well be a zombie. Yeah. It has a long, long history. It goes back to Dance of Death, Black Death imagery, actually.
Hi. Sorry. I was just wondering if you've ever actually made one of the costumes or dresses that you describe in your books, like whether, I know you said you sketched them, but whether you've actually put the effort into actually creating it for yourself.
So,
did you ever make any of the costumes from your own novels, the ones that you might have
well,
sketched?
yeah, I wouldn't have been making them for myself because I'm not the people in the book.
You mean it's fiction?
I'm afraid it's actually fiction. Yeah, people have done, however, quite peculiar things. For instance, there's a quilt described at the end of Alias Grace, and a number of people have made that quilt. And then they have taken pictures of the quilt and they have sent them to me. They have usually then auctioned off the quilt for some charitable purpose. A number of people have also made the cake described in The Edible Woman, and they have taken pictures of the cake, and then they have taken pictures of themselves eating the cake, and then they have sent them to me. So this is so other people are realizing the certain elements of the book. I don't feel that I need to do that personally myself, but I've made other things. I've definitely made other things that do not appear in the books.
I can imagine a fashion and fiction show here at the V&A.
Well, there's one that I would like to see done, and it's in Stone Mattress. It's an outdoor production of Richard III, in which the stage props and costumes are pretty meticulously designed, and I would kind of like to see that.
There's some wonderful description in Stone Mattress, Constance Star. Sadly, I think that unfortunately finishes this hour in Speech Marks, and just from me, a very personal thank you to Margaret Atwood. But also, I just wanted to say that I've always looked at, I've just, always just loved these novels, but to see them from this particular perspective of fashion, costume, has really been absolutely fascinating. And I do want to thank a couple of people very much. I want to thank Zoe Hood very, very much from Little Brown Virago. Zoe's been fantastic all along. Thank you, Zoe. And I also want to thank Anna Blazak, who has been doing a lot of research for me and is also a complete and utter Atwood nut. I think that's what they're called, or geeks. And I want to thank Jo Banham as well, very much, for being so supportive of this. And I think most of all, Margaret Atwood. Yes. Thank you so much.